Now, I request our next speaker for today, Dr. N. Velmurugan Sir, Principal and Professor, Head of Department of Conservative Dentistry and Endodontics, Meenakshi Ammal Dental College, who will be sharing his views on quality assessment of included studies. We are glad to welcome Dr. A. Subbiah Sir, Professor and Head, Department of Conservative Dentistry and Endodontics of Balaji Dental College, who will be moderating this session. He finished his undergraduation in Raja Muthiah Dental College from Annamalai University in 1992 and post-graduation in Tamil Nadu Government Dental College in 1997. He has more than 24 years of experience in teaching and endodontic practice. He has also presented several research papers and guest lectures in national and international conferences and has more than 45 original research publications in index journals. He is currently a reviewer of the well-known journals such as Clinical and Oral Investigations, Journal of Conservative Dentistry, Endodontology Journal, Indian Journal of Dental Research. He has received several awards and accolades, including the Best Teacher Award and is a diplomat of Indian Board of Endodontics. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure introducing Dr. N. Velmurugan, whom I know for the past 33 years nearly, right from the day he joined BDS in Raja Muthiah Dental College also, and at Government Dental College, Chennai. He finished his BDS at Raja Muthiah Dental College in 1993 and finished his MBS in Government Dental College, Chennai in 1999. He is currently the principal in Meenakshi Ammal Dental College and also the professor and head of conservative dentistry and endodontics. He has more than 22 years of teaching experience. He is, I have seen him as a avid researcher, astute clinician right from the BDS days, and that has the research has taken him to quite a large number of publications in reputed journals, which includes close to 100 publications he's got to study, and which include systematic reviews also, and which include the systematic review Journal of Endodontics, which was published in the May issue, this recent issue, May issue this year. So, which he published along with Dr. Pradeep Kumar and Dr. Nivedita. And he's also currently pursuing his PhD in root canal disinfection. And apart from this, he got a lot of awards and recognitions. The list goes on and on. Which, so to be short, he's been awarded Best Teacher twice at Meenakshi Ammal Dental College in 2006 and 2013. And he's also received in 2016 the IACDE Academic Excellence Award. And he's, because of his quality of publications, he's also a reviewer in reputed journals, including Journal of Endodontics, European Endodontic Journal, Clinical Oral Investigations, IJPR, and Journal of Conservative Dentistry. And it's really going to be very informative to hear the quality assessment of included studies, which is a critical aspect of systematic review and meta-analysis. And this person who's got vast experience in publication and also systematic reviews, and he is going to be the right person to talk on this critical aspect of this systematic review. And I'm sure the students will be benefiting a lot from your lecture, Velmurugan, and over to you for the lecture. Thank you.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, Dr. Velmurugan, you can please go.
Yeah. Good afternoon, one and all. Yeah. Good afternoon, one and all. At the outset, I would like to thank Mahalakshmi ma'am, Rajkumar, Saravana Karthikeyan, Dr. Kritika, and all the other organizers of this SRM from SRM program, having invited me to deliver a lecture here. I'm immensely pleased and privileged to be delivering a lecture in this forum. not working. Yeah, I'll be covering the topic in these lines. I'll be introducing the quality assessment. Then I'll be talking about the hierarchies of evidence, a little bit about data extraction, then the quality assessment of the studies, the various risk of bias tools. I'll be probably covering that using some examples, and then finally conclusion. Now, quality is the buzzword. We want quality in whatever we buy or whatever we order online, or we expect the quality of food in a restaurant, or we also expect the movie to be of a good quality. So why not we expect the quality from the scientific research article what we are reading? So how can we assess that? We can probably do that by critical appraisal of the article. So it's a balanced approach. So we have to find out the strength and weaknesses of the article. Like if there is an essay which is given for an assessment, we look into all the good and not so good aspects of the essay. So you look for trustworthiness. You find out whether the student has actually correctly answered and clearly written it, factually correct and clearly written it. And in the context of the question, whether they've answered it correctly. So similarly, we need to have a balanced judgment of the trustworthiness and suitability of the article to a particular context. It's not only to criticize, we have to analyze both the strength and weaknesses of an article. And basically, it is done in 4 ways. We are going to assess the quality of reporting of individual studies and that of the review, the quality of method and conduct of the studies and the review, the risk of bias of individual studies and the review, and the quality of the body of evidence. Of course, the last one is going to be covered in detail by Dr. Srinivasan and Dr. Venkatesh Babu. And today I'll be covering the other 3 quality aspects of a study. Now, it doesn't mean it's only the assessment of each individual studies. We also have to assess all the studies put together also. And by now, all of us are aware we are having both quantitative research and qualitative research. And majority of the research, what we are up to are with regard to quantitative approaches. So I'll be dealing with that in detail. And finally, towards the end, I will touch upon the qualitative research assessment also. Now, before we go into the assessment of the studies, we need to know about the hierarchies of evidence. This most of you are familiar with, and according to the Oxford Center for Evidence-Based Medicine, we know that the ones at the top of the pyramid have highest level of evidence, and the ones at the bottom have the lowest level of evidence. So the highest level of evidence is reserved for systematic review of randomized clinical trials, because they collate and collect information from individual randomized clinical trials. And next in the hierarchy is randomized clinical trials. It is considered a better evidence than any other study because it takes steps to minimize the bias. There is randomization, there is blinding, and hence it is considered a better evidence when compared to all the other studies. Then you have the non-randomized clinical trials, and then of course followed by systematic review of observational studies. So some of the research question cannot be answered, or the research design cannot be taken up for a randomization. So such questions will be answered by a observational study. And in an observational study, if you are having a longitudinal component to it, then you will probably be able to also map the adverse effects and side effects, which are usually not picked in a randomized clinical trial. And also the participants who go into the study is not very restrictive in an observational study, whereas in a randomized clinical trial, you cannot sometimes generalize the results. So they do have their place in the hierarchy of evidence. In observational study, the prospective observational study has got a better evidence when compared to the retrospective studies, because you are going to collect all the possible information. But in a retrospective study, since you're going retrospective in nature, it is possible that some of the data cannot be collected or it will be missed. And lastly, you have the case report and case series. There is no comparison here. It is just a description of some technique or some case report what you have. And of course, expert opinion is also considered because of the interpretation. Now, with regards to, that is with regards to the quantitative research. Now, with regards to qualitative research, the hierarchy is described as firstly the generalizable studies, then the conceptual studies, the descriptive studies, and single case studies. We'll be dealing with this towards the end of my lecture. Now, what is the first assessment of the included study? It is the quality of the reporting, how well the study is reported. You have plenty of guidelines, and they give you a lot of checklists and flow diagrams, and they indicate to you what should be in the paper and in what order. Of course, there are many reporting guidelines, and they have slightly different methodologies also. And these are some of the guidelines what you have. The Equator guidelines, enhancing the quality and transparency of health research, the consolidated standards for reporting trials, the STROBE guidelines for the observational trials and observational studies, and the PRISMA guidelines for the systematic review and meta-analysis. So we have to look out for the missing information from the published checklist, and the requirements are slightly different for certain journals. Certain journals are very prescriptive about what can go into and what cannot go into a paper, and so we need to check into all the supplemental information for the quality of reporting. And this is the PRISMA 2020 guideline. It is an extensive 27-item checklist about which Dr. Nivedita has already spoken about. So I'm not going to deal with that. And after the quality of the reporting, the next is the methodological quality of the studies. How well the included individual studies are designed and conducted. Of course, now you will be familiar with two of the agencies which are more prominent for these systematic reviews, the Cochrane Collaboration and the Joanna Briggs Institute. They take up different methodologies. For example, Cochrane considers risk of bias to be different from the critical appraisal, and they deal more with the quantitative data. Whereas the JBI combines the critical appraisal and the risk of bias together, and they use a qualitative and mixed method approach. Or the main principle behind JBI evidence tool is to find out the extent to which the author in a study has taken up procedures or tried to minimize the possibility of bias in the design, conduct, and the analysis. And the Cochrane tools are methodological specific. Of course, you have tools to assess wide variety of different studies also, but it is always better to avoid such tools because comprehensive coverage may not be possible. And briefly about the data extraction before we go into the assessment of the individual studies. The data extraction has to be done by two independent reviewers, and you have to link to the publications to avoid data duplication. You can use standard extraction forms, and these data extraction forms and the process has to be pilot tested. And you often have some disagreements. So we'll have to decide before as to how to solve these disagreements, maybe in consultation with the senior reviewer. And we also have ethically and morally, we have to probably do a proper systematic review. And previous studies on various systematic reviews which have already been done, they found that the maximum mistakes happen during data extraction. And if the reviewers have done a wrong data extraction, or probably they have misinterpreted, then it is very difficult to identify them even by the reviewers or the editors. Then you are going to get a systematic review with a wrong conclusion or a wrong judgment. So they emphasize that data extraction has to be done properly. And you can use the generic data extraction template, which is available, or you can customize the template for the topic of review you are doing. Or recently, I found out that there is some Nivo software for the qualitative articles also, but I've not tried it so far. And this, I think Dr. Nivedita has already covered. So the data extraction has to be complete in the terms of context and the participants. So you have to, it has to be relevant to the review question, the important elements, the study setting, the population profile, participants, and the intervention if applicable. Then the study design and the methods used, the methodological approach, the sampling, the data collection analysis, any theoretical model used to interpret or contextualize the findings. Now, the data extraction has to be done independently by 2 reviewers. This I have mentioned already. And it also needs to be verified again, if at all, if there is a senior reviewer, so that you don't miss any data or you don't do any misinterpretation. And then this is one of our articles which we published last year in the dental traumatology on fragment reattachment after complicated crown root fractures of anterior teeth. This we published in the dental traumatology journal. So here we customized the data extraction for this thing. We subdivided it into 4 categories. We had the demographic details of the patient-related characteristics separately, the crown root characteristics separately, and followed by the reattachment techniques. So in this way, we don't miss out any of the data, and it will also be easier for us to report these quality data separately under each of these subheadings. So this is the data extraction for the demographic data. And then this is the data which we have gathered from all the articles. And then it not take up the data only from the published articles. Often additional information have to be sought by contacting the author or looking for additional information in research data depository. Dr. Nivedita already mentioned that if at all you're going to do a systematic review, we have to register our protocol in one of the databases. Often the journals have some restrictive word count. So probably the authors will minimize some of the informations in the published articles. So you look for additional information in the database repository or clinical trial registry, or if it is a drug, if it involves a drug trial, then you also have to look into the clinical study reports published by the involved pharmaceutical companies. Now, extracting the data. So this is what we came across in one of our SRs, which we have not published. That is with regards to pulp canal obliteration and coronary artery disease. So we had more than a dozen of articles what we got. So I have intentionally blurred out the author and the journal in which it has come up. So this is the first one. We had 3 articles, but during analysis, one of my PG found out that the data was the same. So you just have to look into the materials and methods. It consisted of 300 subjects with an age range 20 to 25 and so on. And then you go and see the conclusion. The CAD subjects have high chances of being affected with pulp stones. Higher prevalence to this entity in multiple teeth may warrant such an individual in the presence of compounding risk factors as a candidate for CAD to be ruled out. Now, take a look at all the other included articles we had. This is also by the same authors, but they had temporarily included some co-authors, and the data is the same. And so sometimes you will have to put on your investigative hat, and you will have to identify the data duplication and avoid it. So in this case, we had to exclude the last 2 articles, and we took up the data only from the first published article. So you'll have to put in your investigative hat to find out this. So to sum up this part, key to successful data collection, you construct an easy to use form. It has to be structured and organized, collect sufficient and unambiguous data, to faithfully represent the source, effort to identify data needed for meta-analysis, and this data should be available for future access and also for data sharing. Now, coming to the important point, the risk of bias. What is bias? It is a systematic error or deviation from truth. There can be bias in the selected individual studies, or there can be bias in the review itself, what you are doing. Of course, bias in the individual studies is not in our control, but the bias in the review can be controlled. And the assessment has to be transparent, and we also need to give our judgments and how we are adjusting our recommendation and conclusions for that particular topic. And it is always called as risk of bias and not actual bias, because they feel that proper terminology to be used is the risk of bias. Now, the risk of bias, some of the agencies consider it is also as a critical appraisal of individual studies. The reviewers tend to assign quality score, but you have to find out the study quality, the choice of outcome measures, the statistical test involved, the intervention and reporting, and it encompasses the errors attributable to chance and erroneous interface. And the analysis of studies can often verify or quantify the direction and magnitude of bias. And the SR can assess the risk of bias rather than a particular bias what is present. Nowadays, the quality scoring systems are not validated. Instead, they ask you to assess the quality of the study design and the content. And the risk of bias tool, what you choose, should reflect the methodology of the studies included. Now, for example, the Joanna Briggs Institute offers numerous tools, one for case reports, case series, for diagnostic tests, for prevalence studies, for cohort randomized control trials also. So you choose the proper tool for your review. So, and the Cochrane has got a separate tool for randomized control trials, whereas your USPS has a tool for both randomized control trials and observational trials. And you have tools also for specific clinical area. For example, back pain treatment, they have a specific tool. So whatever tool you choose, you have to pilot test the tool also. And then you'll have to tailor make the tool by addition and deletion of questions according to the research question what we have. So you tailor make the tool by adding or omitting the questions. You develop a rating guidelines. You run the tool with a small number of studies and then see for an agreement. If there is poor agreement between the reviewers, we have to again go back to step one and then look into the guidelines and also all the questions and then run it again until you get a good agreement. And once you get a good agreement, you will apply the tool to all the studies. And like for data extraction, two independent reviewers have to do the risk of bias in order to minimize the errors and also to reduce the single person influence. So we decide in advance also the process of resolving disagreements. As I mentioned before, probably two reviewers can do the risk of bias. And if there is any disagreement, then it can be resolved in consultation with the senior reviewers. And it is always good also to have a expert in content or methodology in the review team. And choosing a proper tool, so you'll have to decide on based on the study design, whether it is randomized or non-randomized studies. The Cochrane risk of bias tool, ROB2, is the newer version of the older risk of bias tool, which is available. And for non-randomized studies, you have Robbins. This is for the Cochrane. And going back to one of our published systematic reviews on, this is the same one which I used as an example previously, fragment reattachment after complicated crown root fractures. After applying the search category and the eligibility criteria, we had two different types of study designs, one case report and another case series. So here we will have to use multiple tools to do the assessment of the selected articles. A separate JBI tool exists for case report and case series, and the articles were assessed using respective tool. So you may have to use multiple tools to assess your included studies. And this is another systematic review that we very recently published in IEJ on the use of ultrasound imaging for differential diagnosis of periapical lesions of endodontic origin in comparison with histopathology. So there was another earlier systematic review on the use of ultrasound for diagnosis of bone lesions of the jaw. But here you find in our discussion, we have pointed out what was wrong. They included articles in that Musu's review was done as either case report or case series. They have used a observational tool to verify the quality of the article. So this will wrongly give you a risk of bias. So this was one of the rationales why we did this, we did this systematic review. And of course, we did the earlier study, they didn't have a publication bias, which they didn't do. And they also looked into only the bony lesions of jaws in enterity. So we have specified with regards to the endodontic region. So these were the three reasons why we did this particular review. Now, going back to the same systematic review. So two investigators independently scored the articles. In case of disagreement, the senior reviewer was consulted. And of course, based on the number of yes or no, here you have, for a case report, you have 8 questions. So based on the number of yes or no, you calculate the score. If the score is less than or equal to 49, we call it high risk of bias. Moderate risk of bias if it is between 50 to 69, and low risk of bias if it is more than 70. And in addition to that, in fact, some of the journals may ask you for the inter-rater reliability. In this particular article, we did the Kappa score comparison for the reviewers for each and every question and overall together. Some of the Cochrane does not insist on an inter-rater reliability, but some of the reviewers and editors ask you for the inter-rater agreement. So it is better to do it. And doing a systematic review involves a tremendous and lot of amount of work. Hence, personally, I feel it is always better to have a 4-member or a 5-member team and also one expert in that particular domain so that it's easier for us to accomplish. I think Dr. Nivedita also highlighted the same. This is the JBI risk of tool for case reports. Let's just see it. Here, they ask you for the patient's demographic details. So whether it is yes, no, unclear, or not applicable, the patient history, the current clinical condition, the diagnostic test, what is used, the intervention, the post-intervention clinical condition, any adverse effects, and it has got any takeaway lessons. And then you also have an overall scoring which is given, and then the name of the reviewer, the date, the author. So for each and every article, we'll have to do the same. And JB also gives you a explanation tools for all the 8 questions. What is it you'll have to look for and how do you answer? So using this, we have answered these questions. So the top table is for the case report and the bottom is for the case series. So we have, as per for the first question, the first Akhtar article, it was yes, and then followed by no. So we just go on and map the answers like this. And then you can feed in the answer into the Revman chart so that you get the traffic light graph. So the red is for high risk of bias, yellow is for moderate risk of bias, and green is for low risk of bias. So this is the author response in the Revman. The columns are indicating the questions and the rows are indicating the articles. And on the left side, you have it for the case report, and the right side, you have it for the case series. Now, this is the overall summary of the risk of bias. So you can clearly know where the bias was in the case report and the case series. So in this particular article, we had a peculiar situation. Not always your selection of tool is straightforward. Sometimes you end up in a peculiar situation. Initially, we had 14 articles which were selected for this review. 11 were case reports and 3 were case series. But subsequently, we found that in one of the case series, 2 of the articles did not qualify for the inclusion criteria. In fact, they were not crown root fractures, they were crown fractures. So we had to eliminate them. So we were left out only with one of the cases in that case series. So we had to use that as a case report, and we evaluated that using the JBI tool for case report. So if you are using some other tool, then you may have to give in the justification. Okay. Now going on to the QUADAS, this is the tool meant for primary diagnostic studies. This was developed by University of Bristol. And they have recommended assessing the risk of bias in domains and the applicability concerns. And the first version came in 2003 and the newer version in 2011. And they have 4 domains, mainly the patient selection, the index test, the reference standard, and the flow and timing. So the first 3 domains, there is the risk of bias and applicability concern. The flow and timing has no applicability concern. And you have signaling questions to assist in the judgment of risk of bias. And it is applied in 4 phases. The summary of review question. You have to tailor the tool to review, provide review specific guidance, construct a flow diagram for the primary study, assess the risk of bias and concerns regarding applicability. Now, let's take this example. This is our article which has been accepted for publication in the JOE, and it's article in press. The full version is accepted. Probably it will get published in the next couple of months. This is diagnosis of vertical root fracture by cone beam computer tomography in root-filled teeth, confirmed by direct visualization, a systematic review, and meta-analysis. So this is the first phase of the QUADAS, first domain. State the review question and draw a flow diagram. Then using the PERT strategy, the vertical root fracture in root-filled teeth not diagnosed in 2D radiograph. The index test was CBCT here, and the reference test was surgical exploration, extraction, and root resection. And the target was the VRF. Now, with regards to the patient selection domain, so one of the questions, random sample of patients, is not possible in this research study. So we have not considered that for the risk of bias. So the first question was not considered. And then take a look at the second question. What's the control design avoided? So if a case control design is there, it means it is a high risk of bias. Why? When you are comparing a diagnostic test, if you are comparing a case with the disease condition and you are comparing that with a control who does not have a disease condition, then obviously the diagnostic test accuracy is exaggerated. So if they have used a case control design, then the risk of bias is high. And then did the study avoid inappropriate exclusions? And then finally, the concerns regarding applicability. Is there a concern that the included patients do not match the review question? Now, next is the index test. And in the index test, the QUADAS2 tool insists on blinding of the results of index test from the reference test, what we are doing. So that is the first question. And the second question is, was there a threshold used? Was it pre-specified? But in this review, we had included articles which had used CBCT of different voxel sizes and slice thickness. So we could not consider the threshold. So that was also not considered for the risk of bias. And then the third domain is with regards to reference standard. Is the reference standard likely to correctly classify the target condition? So far, the gold standard for identifying the VRF is surgical exploration. But was the reference standard results interpreted without the knowledge of the index test This may not be always possible. In an ambiguous condition like VRF, most often the person who's doing the reference standard can judge that that could be a VRF. So this was a source of bias in the included articles. And then finally, with regards to flow and timing, was there an interval, appropriate interval between the index test and reference standard? Why this question becomes important is you may have a vertical root fracture which is not picked up by the CBCT. Let's assume that it is a incomplete vertical root fracture, very faint one, which is not picked up. But if you're going to delay the time interval between the index test and the reference test, here is surgical exploration, it is possible that during the delayed period, it can be a full-blown vertical root fracture, and hence the reference standard is easily able to identify the target condition, which was not identified by the index test. So this will set in a bias. So this is what you have to look for when you are doing a assessment of the articles. This is one of the first article. We had 8 articles in this VRF review. So this is the what we have answers for the questions. We have recorded the bias and the applicability concern. This is for the second article. Like that, we go on and then we find the overall risk of bias. You find that in the index test and the reference test, the risk of bias is moderate, whereas in the flow and timing and the patient selection domain, you are having some concerns. Especially flow and timing, you have 4 articles with high risk of bias. Now, this is the our response to the individual questions, the risk of bias domain and the applicability concerns of the 8 articles. And finally, the summary of evidence. You can find that in reference standard and in flow and timing, you have the risk of bias. Now, these results are input into the grade analysis, about which Dr. Venkatesh Babu is going to talk about in detail tomorrow. So they employ these results for assessing the certainty of evidence. So here they have considered the risk of bias to be serious, both for sensitivity and specificity of the CBCT. As an example, the same article about which I had discussed before, using ultrasound. Here the comparison was histopathology. So review-specific tailoring was done. One of the questions were found not suitable. 4 evaluators independently and assessed the answers. And here, instead of the table format, they have used an Excel format, and straight away they have marked the high and low risk and the moderate risk. And this is, of course, the Revman chart. You can clearly see in the patient selection domain, we are having high risk of bias regarding the applicability, as there was no clear explanation on method of enrollment of the patients. Already the patients had periapical lesions when they were selected. Now, with regards to risk of bias in randomized controlled trials, there is more protection for bias. And bias can occur in 3 areas: the allocation, concealment, double blinding, or the type of randomized trial. Okay, and if the trials are inadequately concealed and not double blinded, there is a chance that the study result may give more significant result. Now, with regards to Cochrane, they have the ROB2, which is the new tool for assessing the randomized trial. They do that in 5 domains, and they answer it as, and the domains are answered as yes, probably no, no, or no information. The unclear part is removed, and they judge the overall risk of bias. So the risk of bias for randomized trial is done in these 5 areas. The bias arising out of randomization process, bias due to deviation from intended intervention, bias due to missing outcome data, bias in measurement of the outcome, and bias in selection of the reported results. And then this is the overall judgment we have to make. Low risk of bias if all the domains have low risk of bias. And then high risk of bias if at least in one of those 5 domains you have a high risk, then it is judged to be high risk of bias. Or if you have some concern in all the 5 domains, then you can judge it to be high risk of bias. And some concerns, if one of the study has some concern in at least one of the domains. Just let's take the example of bias arising out of randomization process. Okay. So the trials contribute to multiple results, and we need to be selecting the specific results from the included studies to assess. The approach should focus on the main outcome of the review. That will be more appropriate. So randomization, it avoids the influence of known or unknown prognostic factors on the intervention group. And if the allocation is known after randomization, if the investigator knows the assignment, then he can probably manipulate the patient to go into one particular group, the trial group, experimental group, or the control group according to his need. And this can occur if the investigator comes to know about the sequence allocation. So this can be avoided by concealed allocation. This, I think, Dr. Nivedita also spoke about. So allocation concealment, SNOOS, sequentially numbered opaque sealed envelopes, and it is opened only just prior to doing the treatment. In this way, you can avoid the bias. Or else probably we can also, if it involves some drug, then it can be pharmacy control number or coded containers, and the coding is revealed or uncoded only after the statistical assessment is done. But the best is to do a central randomization wherein people not related to the investigating team do the randomization process. And also, we also have to look at the baseline imbalance, whether that indicates a problem in randomization. And this is the questions, and they're given the elaboration side by side, and then the response. I think the Cochrane tool, ROB2 tool, does not allow for any tailor specifying the questions. So you cannot add or delete any questions. You have to answer all the questions. So this is the mapping, and finally they feed it into an algorithm, and it clearly gives you whether there is low risk, some concern, or high risk. And similarly, the bias due to deviations from intended interventions. So if the patient undergoes additional interventions, not a part of the trial protocol, or failure to implement the protocol intervention as intended, or non-adherence by the trial participants to the assigned intervention, then it can lead to a performance bias. And just to keep it very simple, probably if the patient is put into a group wherein he is taking a new drugs, and if there are a lot of toxicity for the new drug, the patient switches over to the control drug or alternative drug. So that's just to keep it very simple. Now that responses are also mapped, and this is the algorithm for the that particular domain. Similarly, the each and every domain, the other three domain on missing outcome data, measurement of outcome, and bias in selection of the reported result is done, and overall risk of bias is done for the randomized clinical trial. If it is a non-randomized clinical trial, then you can use the Robbins tool, and it has got 7 domains. 3 deals with the lack of randomization, and final judgment is low risk of bias, the study comparable to a well-performed randomized clinical trial, moderate risk of bias, sound evidence but not comparable to a randomized clinical trial, serious bias has important problems, critical risk of bias, it's problematic, and maybe it is not included in the synthesis. And then risk of bias for observational studies, chances for bias is very high, selection bias. You can use some statistical methods to reduce the impact. There can be deduction bias, performance bias, or information bias also. And how to use your appraisal result, maintain transparency, document your decisions and the reasons why you made a judgment of high risk of bias or low risk of bias, table the appraisal findings and make it clear to the reader. And finally, a little bit about the quality of the quality appraisal of the qualitative studies. It is done using scientific reasoning and methodological rigor. Transparency is the key word here, and they use terms slightly different from what is used for the other type of studies. Instead of internal validity, they call it credibility. external validity, can link it to transferability. Reliability and objectivity is dependability and confirmability. And you also have separate tools for assessing the qualitative research, they look in for the conceptual clarity and interpretive rigor. And they decide the paper finally into 4 categories. A paper that is conceptually rich and potentially could make an important contribution to the synthesis. A satisfactory paper, fatally flawed or irrelevant to the synthesis. Now, just with regards to some of the newer developments, they are having some novel method. They are using machine learning to do the risk of bias. So we don't have to struggle more. And they found these semi-automated methods are giving promising results just for the latest. And finally, I would like to conclude the data extraction and the risk of bias to be done by 2 independent reviewers. Choose the correct tool for assessing the quality of the articles. You have to assess the strength and weaknesses of the study and also give a summary of body of evidence. And finally, I would like to thank you all for a kind and patient hearing. And I would like to thank Team ODS, my staff and postgraduates of my department for helping me in this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Velmurugan. It was a really extensive touch upon the various aspects of the quality assessment. In fact, it looked like a lecture come demo on this particular topic, where you had demonstrated how each and every the article of yours you had, how you did, and what are the difficulties you face. It's almost like a demonstration, live demonstration of the experience you had. They were wonderful. And how important the hierarchies of evidence, right, from how important the randomized control trials, the most important part of the studies, and then of course non-randomized control trials. Case reports doesn't really form the most important part of the study, how you highlighted on that. That shows not only the systematic doing a randomized control trial over trying to publish the case reports. Instead of publishing 4 or 5 case reports, they can put all the effort into the randomized control trial, which will go into systematic review more often than a case report. That's that important. It goes to the students to start on their randomized control trials rather than doing case reports. And the data extraction, how important data extraction is, also told us the various problems which is involved in data extraction and the risk of bias, the most important part of the systematic review, how the various checklists are available and the tools for assessment. And we can even use multiple tools. Yeah, more often it will be increase the strength of these systematic review and how unlike the thing your regular assessment, you can use 2 or 3. I mean, even in one study you have shown 4 independent reviewers where you initially it was 2, then you then gave it to 2 experienced reviewers. And again, that's what I'm trying to say. The demo you showed how it should be done. It was very nice. And then finally the machine learning, that sounds very promising. So I think as day by day all these things getting automated. Things are getting easier, but of course, things are becoming more stricter also. So with machine learning, it also things more and more stringent criteria, and we'll be able to bring out a much higher quality systematic reviews and methodologies. I mean, very lovely the way of presenting this particular topic. I am sure the postgraduate students who have been really benefited from this lecture. And I thank you once again. From the SRM Dental College, I would like to present the certificate of our appreciation for presenting this particular topic on quality of assessment of included studies on SRM from SRM. Thank you once again. Unmute, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Subbaiah, for very nicely summarizing Dr. Velmurugan's lecture. And thank you, Dr. Velmurugan, for that wonderful, crisp
Thank you, ma'am.
lecture on quality assessment of included studies. I would like to now present a certificate of appreciation to Dr. Subbaiah for moderating this session. For all the participants, I would like to tell them that please go ahead and put your questions in the question and answer box. We will be now having a panel discussion on this topic, on the 2 lectures that we have just concluded. And the speakers will be available to give answer your questions. Thank you both of you. Over to you, Kritika.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir, for the wonderful session.